Right now, literally above our heads, there is a massive paradigm shift happening in national security. Let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to unpack the world of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what people in the industry call ISR. We're looking at a fascinating transition today. It's happening up in orbit, sure, but more importantly, it's happening right inside our data centers. We are rapidly moving from a world totally obsessed with hardware sensors to a world where software sovereignty is the absolute ultimate prize. To really get this, we have to start with a blunt, undeniable truth that frames the entire problem. As the source material points out right out of the gate, collection outran exploitation years ago. That is the core thesis of everything we're about to cover. Basically, we've gotten unbelievably good at vacuuming up data from the sky, but our ability to actually exploit it, to make sense of what we're looking at in real time, has completely fallen behind. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the sensor data deluge, then look at the European sovereignty shift, followed by why software is the new ground. After that, we'll trace the ISR Arc, and finally wrap up with building to keep it honest. Let's get into it. Starting with Section 1, the sensor data deluge, and the growing gap between collection and exploitation. To really wrap your head around the scale of this gap, just look at the extraordinary hardware we've flooded the sky with. We've got multiplying radar constellations that can literally see through clouds and darkness, revisiting the exact same spot on Earth multiple times an hour. We have wide-area cameras recording entire cities for hours on end. It's a literal fire hose of incredible data. But here's the massive bottleneck. The software layer required to turn those endless torrents of data into actionable decisions, it just hasn't kept pace. We are essentially trying to drink from a multi-billion-dollar space fire hose with a tiny, fragile software straw. And that gap is exactly where the economics, the politics, and the engineering of modern ISR are all colliding right now. Moving to Section 2, the European sovereignty shift and why nations are moving up the tech stack. You see, this data deluge creates a massive geopolitical vulnerability, and Europe has realized they have to move their sovereignty up the technology stack to protect themselves. Over the last few years, they actually settled the foundational layers. Step 1, they secured their own launch capabilities and cloud infrastructure. Step 2, they started securing the satellites themselves. But Step 3, well, that's where the new battle lies today, securing sovereign exploitation software. And you can see a profound shift in how they're spending their money here. Nations like Germany, Poland, Portugal, and Greece, they aren't just paying for imagery subscriptions from commercial providers anymore. No way. They are tossing entire satellite constellations into their shopping carts. They are taking absolute ownership of the physical assets in space. So the hardware problem is largely being solved through direct ownership. Which brings us to Section 3, software is the new ground and the ultimate vulnerability. Here's the catch. Owning a multi-million-dollar satellite constellation means absolutely nothing if you still have to rely on foreign software to analyze your own classified intelligence. As the source powerfully states, the software that reads the sensor is the new sovereign ground. And right now, that ground is still substantially unclaimed. European institutions actually drew a line in the sand this spring, stating they will now only sign contracts for exploitation software that isn't controlled from another jurisdiction. Simply put, the physical camera can be up in space, but the brain interpreting those images must reside safely at home. All right, Section 4, tracing the ISR arc. 5 moves from physics to rules. To truly understand this convergence of economics, politics, and engineering, the author traces this entire arc in 5 distinct moves. It walks you logically from the raw physical science all the way to the regulatory rules evaluating the technology. It kicks off with an explainer on SAR, synthetic aperture radar, covering the actual physics of how these satellites use radar to see through clouds, and what that persistence means for buyers. Then it highlights a major market signal documenting a procurement shift. Third is Corvus ISR, a live build-in public software stack. Fourth is Benchmark EO, analyzing the regulatory layer. And finally, returning dispatches, which dive deep into wide-area motion imagery, delta, and digital twin analysis from the archives. Let's zero in on that second move for a second, because this market signal proves how unbelievably fast this landscape is shifting. The author notes a Palantir exit procurement shift. What this actually means is that the desire for locally controlled, sovereign software isn't just political hot air anymore. Sentiment is turning into real, named contracts in just 90 days. The market is moving at lightning speed to plug the software gap. And finally, Section 5, building to keep it honest through radical transparency.
Instead of just analyzing this massive market shift from the sidelines, the author takes a really cool build in public approach. Behind all the coverage we've just discussed, there are actually 3 live products: VigilSAR, Corvus ISR, and VigilSAR Bench. By actually writing the code and building these tools, the author sharpens their technical judgment and is forced to proactively build the strongest possible arguments against their own theories. It establishes massive credibility because they aren't just theorizing about the software gap, they're actively building the sovereign software stacks to fix it, right out in the open.
For example, take a look at Corvus ISR. This is not some secret black box project locked away in a basement. It's a wide-area motion imagery exploitation stack built openly using synthetic data. They even give you a live in-browser demo. You can literally hop into this demo yourself and stress test their tracker until it honestly breaks down. It is a completely transparent way to demonstrate exactly how the exploitation software functions and exactly where its limits are. And that transparency extends straight to the regulatory layer with Benchmark EO. The source highlights a fascinating dynamic here. What happens when the measurement of a software's capability becomes a classified national security secret? Think about it. If you can't see how the software is evaluated, how on earth can you trust it? The argument here is that public evaluation is the ultimate European countermove. By building benchmarks out in the open, you secure sovereignty not through extreme secrecy, but through verifiable public proof of what the tech can actually do. So let's wrap up this explainer with a vital question drawn right from the core of the source's thesis. If the ISR journey starts with a cold hard physics of sensors floating in space, but ultimately ends with the regulatory rules and exploitation software down here on the ground, who is writing your rules? As national sovereignty shifts from owning space hardware to deploying local software, who actually controls the analytical layer that makes your decisions? Because in today's world, whoever owns the software that reads the sensor owns the sovereign ground. Thanks for joining me to unpack these fascinating files.